Emergency riot control missions. When governments teeter on the brink of collapse and civil unrest erupts into chaos, the line between order and anarchy often vanishes in minutes. In such moments, when local security forces are overwhelmed or unwilling to act, states have quietly turned to private military firms to restore control without igniting international scrutiny. Among those firms, Blackwater stood at the ready, trained, equipped, and prepared to respond to riots and uprisings in some of the world's most volatile hotspots. Emergency riot control missions were never part of Blackwater's public contract portfolio, but behind the scenes, their operatives were allegedly deployed to countries facing large-scale unrest, particularly where U.S. interests were at stake: oil fields, embassies, strategic ports, or fragile allied governments. These missions weren't about crowd management in the traditional sense. They were about rapid intervention, strategic intimidation, and, if necessary, overwhelming force. One of the most talked about but never officially confirmed deployments was in a Gulf nation during the Arab Spring. As protests surged and the local military hesitated to act against its own population, Blackwater-linked personnel were brought in under private contracts. Disguised as security consultants, they trained rapid response units, advised on riot dispersal techniques, and, according to some accounts, took to the streets in civilian vehicles, coordinating crackdowns from the shadows. In Africa, during post-election violence in an unstable regime, Blackwater operatives were reportedly flown in to secure government buildings, media stations, and radio towers. Their tactics went beyond holding positions. They identified protest leaders, established curfews, and carried out night patrols in coordination with local police. The message was clear: protests would be contained, and control would be re-established, by any means necessary. Blackwater's riot control approach was rooted in battlefield efficiency. Operatives were trained in non-lethal crowd suppression tactics, but also carried live weapons. They used sound cannons, rubber bullets, tear gas, and flashbang grenades. But when things escalated, they had no hesitation in switching to live ammunition, especially if they deemed a threat to critical infrastructure or personnel. The presence of private contractors in riot situations sparked outrage among human rights groups. Who authorized them? What rules of engagement applied? Were they acting on behalf of a foreign power, or merely protecting corporate interests? The answers, as always with Blackwater, were buried beneath layers of non-disclosure agreements and offshore contracts. From Latin America to Southeast Asia, similar patterns emerged. In cities erupting over economic collapse, electoral fraud, or sectarian violence, unidentified security teams appeared overnight, imposing order, seizing control of key routes, and disappearing when the smoke cleared. Locals were often left wondering who had restored control and at what cost. To the governments that hired them, Blackwater offered a solution to the unsolvable. They could be summoned quickly, required no legislative approval, and operated without the political baggage of deploying national troops. Their job wasn't to negotiate, it was to contain. Emergency riot control missions demonstrated Blackwater's capacity to operate not just in war zones, but in the political crises between war and peace. They weren't peacekeepers. They weren't invaders. They were the force of last resort, called in when legitimacy had broken down and only power remained. And when the smoke cleared and the crowds dispersed, they left no press conferences, no official records, just silence, and a government still standing.